Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjanashanasya Chakshurumitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Guru Vishtam Samitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadabhayam Nadati Swapadantikam Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Ruta Paramalam Shri Guru Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Sarvadatam Sarvadam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadukam Parijanasahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sarvadam Lalita Shri Shakhantikam Shri Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Taka Kanta Nagorangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishnavanu Sudevi Pranami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Mayevacha Panitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vajrayane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshadarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So, we'll discuss today verse number 26. Which chapter? 13. The title of the chapter is
The Nature, Joy, and Consciousness.
Nature and Joy and Consciousness. So, in the last verse we discussed, verse 24, Krishna says that one who understands the philosophy concerning the nature of the living entity and all the interactions is sure to attain liberation, regardless of where they start. So a very comforting point that regardless of where we are beginning in our journey, this knowledge is so powerful and so uplifting that everyone is assured success. And Prabhupada said that the three kind of main aspects of knowledge, we must have a clear understanding of the material nature, the super soul, and the individual soul. If we know these three things and how they all interrelate, we actually have the answers to everything. And, Einstein spent a life trying to unlock the world's puzzles through math. But actually it's given right here. Understanding the spirit soul, the super soul, and nature from what we are within is sufficient to acquire a life of eternal bliss and happiness. So Prabhupada ended the purport by saying, by knowing this, we'll be transferred into the spiritual world for a blissful eternal life of knowledge. That's what we're all looking for. We want to have full knowledge. Because if we're not satiated, thinking that we know everything, we'll wonder, what else is there? Is there something else? Is there one more thing? Okay? So this knowledge is very important to satisfying our feeling. And of course, knowledge should lead to bliss, happiness. And that is the goal of acquiring knowledge. So in this section, Krishna has been speaking about this Gaya of the 8 terms that Arjuna had inquired about. This Gaya is the 6 terms that Arjuna had inquired about. Gaya is this object of knowledge. So what is this object of knowledge? And that is, of course, we know both the soul and the super soul. Just as they are both the Purusha, one is a dependent enjoyer, one is the independent enjoyer, but just as both are the Kshetra, Gyana, knower. So there's 2 objects of knowledge. And we must know both. Just knowing I'm a spirit soul isn't conclusive to help me understand what is the nature of my soul and what is my activities. So we discussed all of this last time. So now Krishna, in the next verse, speaks about how to acquire this type of knowledge. Okay? So the next thing we have understanding. If I know these 3 things, bliss and happiness awaits. So what's the next obvious question? How do I find out about this? Do I go to Wikipedia? Do I go to Google? Where do I go? How do I get this knowledge? Okay? So Krishna in the 25th verse is saying that some perceive the super soul, again the Gaya, within themselves through meditation. This is in essence this Ashtanga Yoga process, which concludes in having Paramatma realization. Others through cultivation of knowledge. This is basically Sankhya philosophy. Very detailed analysis of all the different elements of the world and how they're constituted will lead to the Lord. And still others through work without fruitive activities, Nishkama Karma Yoga. So these 3 ways are in addition to, of course, what is the most conclusive way to acquire all this knowledge? Devotional service. Through bhakti, by the performance of devotional service, there are 2 immediate side effects. One acquires full knowledge. And 2, detachment from the material world. They are both the byproducts of rendering devotional service. As explained right in the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, this 3 ways are discussed here. And again, in addition to, of course, devotional service. Now, what we'll discuss today in more detail is the 26th verse, which gives the most practical means for all of us. Because how many of us are ready to go to the forest and try to practice Ashtanga Yoga? Anybody? No? Okay. Anybody interested in practicing Sankhya Yoga and trying to analyze the world through intense mental speculation and analysis? Not so much. Even Nishkam Karma Yoga doesn't have the full satisfaction. So, Krishna is giving us another option in the 26th verse. And that's what we'll discuss today. So somebody wants to read the verse?
Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about Him from others. Because of their tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of earthly.
This verse is particularly applicable to modern society because in modern society, there is practically no education in spiritual matters. Some of the people may appear to be aesthetic or agnostic or philosophical, but actually there is no knowledge of philosophy. As for the common man, if he is a good soul, then there is a chance for advancement by hearing. This hearing process is very important. Lord Chaitanya, who preached Krishna consciousness in the modern world, gave great stress to hearing, because if the common man simply hears from authoritative sources, he can progress. Especially, according to Lord Chaitanya, if he hears the transcendental vibration of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. It is stated, therefore, that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age, no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. One should learn to become the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. If one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization and follow in his footsteps, one will be gradually elevated to the position of a pure devotee. In this verse particularly, the process of hearing is strongly recommended, and this is very appropriate. Although the common man is often not as capable as so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. Hari Bol.
So, what are we going to talk about today? In one word?
Hearing.
Hearing.
What are we doing here today?
Hearing.
Hearing from Srila Prabhupada. So, Krishna is ever so kind, as we see. Does he make the process of going back home, back to Godhead so difficult and complex? Nope. We make it complicated, but he doesn't. We make it complicated with what?
Speculative thinking.
Our speculative thinking, perfect. Our own mental concoctions. We complicate the simple. But actually, it's very simple. Right? So Prabhupada says here, one doesn't have to be so capable in philosophy, in esoteric analysis and speculation. But he gives one important qualification to hearing. And what is the qualification that leads hearing to be very effective? He says fairly
From
early.
authoritative sources,
Okay,
from
so-
a pure devotee.
Good soul.
Okay, so good sources from whom to hear, that is right. What is the nature of the person hearing that helps facilitate the actual penetration of the knowledge from a good source?
Goodness.
Goodness. Prabhupada says, right? If, what does he say exactly? If he is a good soul. So the pious persons, they can make very rapid progress by hearing. Until one comes to the pious position, sometimes hearing doesn't have the same effect. So this piety is really important in our hearing. And in summary, what is the conclusion of hearing? What does one do upon hearing?
He gets the right knowledge.
And then what? Yeah?
Return back to Godhead. That's a
To
understand.
do what?
Able to understand.
You can be elevated to the position of a pure devotee himself.
Transcend the material existence.
Transcend material existence, elevate to a pure devotee. The result of hearing, Krishna says, he begins to do what? Worship the Supreme. Engage in devotional service. Good hearing concludes in rendering devotional service. And by rendering devotional service, one becomes a pure devotee, one goes on back home to Godhead, one transcends the modes, becomes free. Okay? So the goal of our hearing should be to engage steadfastly in devotional service. So Krishna says, right, although there are those who are not conversant in spiritual knowledge, which tells us, is there a strong prerequisite to hearing? We can start from ground zero. Absolutely ground zero. But the result is they begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Right? So this hearing process is extraordinarily potent because it can uplift anyone to the highest position. Because the mental speculation and analysis, the Ashtanga yogic process, the conclusion of those processes is what? What is the conclusion of those processes? What does one do if they perfect those processes? It brings them to,
Knowledge of the Supreme Person.
which leads to performance
Devotional
of.
service.
It culminates in devotional service. If it does not, that result is not sane. It has no value. It must conclude in the practice of devotional service. So hearing is going to lead to devotional service, as is these other processes. Now, which is the easier process?
Hearing.
And Prabhupada gives us a comment towards the bottom of the first page, which shows how practical and applicable this hearing is. What does he say? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has mentioned about what do we have to do, or put the other way, using the negative, what don't we have to do?
Change your position.
Change your position. What does that mean, change your position? I don't sit from like this to like this. What does it mean?
You don't have to change your ashram. If you are in Grihastha ashram, you can continue to be in that.
You don't have to change your ashram. If you are a householder, you can perfect devotional service. If you are a youth, you can perfect devotional service. If you are in retirement age, you can achieve devotional service, regardless of your ashram. And regardless of your varna. If you are a Shudra, can you hear and perfect? How about if a Vaishya? Kshatriya and Brahmana? Because we know devotional service means one has become a Vaishnava. And a Vaishnava is spiritual. It transcends Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra. It transcends. It means it is beyond. So, the practical means here is everyone is eligible for hearing. And one doesn't need, hearing will not lead to, pack the bags, close up shop, we're going to the forest. No, wherever we may be, we may dovetail all of our activities in devotional service. Okay, so this is the very practical means. I'm jumping all over the purport now. But now at the beginning of the purport, Prabhupada talks about the atheists. What is the flaw he points out in the atheistic philosophy?
There's no knowledge of the philosophy.
There's no knowledge of philosophy. It means the atheistic view is sentimental. It's a belief. And Prabhupada very, wonderfully, one time an atheist had gone to Prabhupada and said, "Prove to me that God exists." And Prabhupada simply replied, "Prove to me God doesn't exist." And the guy was dumbfounded. So the absence of knowledge is what leads most to become atheistic. It's not the actual presence of knowledge that proves the absence of God. Understand the point? It's not the presence of knowledge, some facts that they can point to that leads them to the atheistic conclusion. It's the lack of bona fide knowledge that leads them to the conclusion that God exists. So the atheist, it's an ignorance of the real facts. So it's not a very stable position, right? So this lack of knowledge leads one, atheistic or agnostic, all are God, everyone's God, these sorts of philosophies, right? But because there isn't any hard knowledge to go on to understand actually what is reality, right? So now if we step back, how to bridge that gap? virtually all of the knowledge we have acquired in life has come from hearing. How much hearing we have done in our lifetime to acquire knowledge? Lots. Right? And anybody ever heard from a bad source and leads to a bad outcome? You're driving down the road and you're asking for directions. And somebody says, yeah, go that way. And your intended destination is this way. What happens? You get lost. But what was the flaw? You were hearing. Well, so what was the flaw in the process? The source. So hearing isn't ubiquitous. Meaning hear from anybody. Hear from anything. No. We have to hear from authority. Right? So, if I'm going to hear about, some nuclear physics, I'm not going to hear about that from a violinist. They may be very expert in their profession, but they don't know anything about nuclear physics. Right? So to hear from authority, I must identify the subject matter expert. And then hearing has potency, value. So there's no real doubt that hearing is the most prevalent way in which we acquire knowledge. Right? So we spend almost our whole life, up until our first 18 years in school. What are we doing? Just hearing. We may do a little bit of lab work here and there to try to test and prove, but really, virtually everything we do, we take on faith. We accept it as fact because we put faith in the source of that knowledge, and we accept it as fact. So, this hearing is not a new concept for us. Hearing to acquire knowledge is not a new concept for us. It's something we've done our whole life. But somehow, when it comes to spiritual matters, this hearing process becomes challenged in two ways. What are the two ways in which we sometimes, struggle with this hearing process? Maybe there are more, but
Lack of faith condition.
lack of faith. Right? How do we know? How do we know? That's one side, and then what's the other?
Not hearing from the right source.
We hear from everything. Now what to do? And unfortunately, we don't have the knowledge to reconcile. Right? If you hear about calculus from 3 different people, do you have the knowledge to reconcile which one's right? No. So you have to put your faith in the institution that you'll take knowledge from. So hearing is very important, but it must be from a bona fide authority, as we talked about very early in this discussion. So all of you are already way ahead. As you know, this from whom we hear is also very, very important. Right? And so when we put our faith in hearing calculus from a certain institution, why do we develop faith in that institution? How do we develop faith that they know?
Because we heard from someone else that
We've heard from somebody else. Yeah. What else?
The results.
The results. We've seen, hey, this person has gone through and done well. This person, okay. So we look for some evidence. Right? So Krishna, as in the beginning of this Bhagavad Gita, in the 4th chapter, has given us the system of from whom to hear. And what is the system of hearing that we must follow when it comes to these very transcendental topics?
parampara system.
Because Prabhupada says in the purport, virtually there is no knowledge of this philosophy. Nobody really knows, but the few who have really understood it. Meaning nobody, meaning in the minority. But how many people have an opinion about spirituality? Everyone. But how many actually know? So we must be very cautious where we hear from. Right? So hearing from the bona fide source will lead to the desired result. So Krishna has established that there is this guru disciplic succession. Guru disciple, guru disciple, guru disciple. And that knowledge is being passed down unadulterated, unchanged, as it is. And if that knowledge is passed down in such a way, then the same exact benefit, well, let's ask a question. How much was Arjuna benefited by hearing directly from Krishna? Did he find some benefit? And do we sometimes wish, oh, if I could just talk to Krishna for a minute? If he would just speak to me, how fortunate we would be, right? Well, hearing this Bhagavad Gita from Guru Disciplic succession has the exact same potency as Arjuna had hearing from Krishna on the chariot. There is no difference in the potency. We only ascribe some differences, but actually there is no difference in the potency. So now, when Srila Prabhupada is presenting Bhagavad Gita, we should be approaching, understanding it has the same potency as Krishna speaking directly to Arjuna. There's not one iota of dilution, because Srila Prabhupada has presented it as it is in Guru Prabhupada. There is no difference. It carries the same effect. So we say that, we still want some proof, right? So let's discuss that. What are some proofs of the power of hearing that we have seen? Very tangibly. Have you ever heard about? There's so many examples, but what are some examples of the power of hearing?
Transformation of a person.
Yeah, give me an example. Parikshit Maharaj. Who did he hear from? Shukadeva Goswami on Srimad Bhagavatam. How intently was he hearing?
He only had 7 days, so pretty intently.
He only had 7 days, and so he did not even he didn't even eat or drink. Why he didn't say, hey, let's take a break? So absorbed in the hearing. When you're in a really good movie, which none of you do, I'm sure, but you don't want to break. You want to keep going. So, Parikshit Maharaj was hearing so intensely. It was so satisfying and so blissful. He didn't even sleep. 7 days. So wonderful example. Others. There are so many.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had conversations with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya.
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's discussion with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya.
Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami hearing from Chaitanya.
Sanatana Goswami, Rupa Goswami hearing on Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. He was a impersonalist. So confused. 7 days. Could speak, but nothing was registered. So confused. But hearing from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, everything got assembled nicely. That's a dramatic transformation, right? Very significant transformation. Who else?
Srila Prabhupada. He brought Ishkan to the Western world, and I mean,
Where do you start, right?
right.
I mean, think about all the people who came. They weren't even necessarily pious souls. But the potency of a pure devotee was even able to overcome their lack of piety. One time they asked Prabhupada, how do I get my piety? He says, I'm giving you your piety. They have even no piety. So the pure devotee is so powerful. And we see Srila Prabhupada, such a spectacular example. By just moments of hearing, the whole consciousness changed and became pure devotees. So many pure devotees he created by the power of hearing. Any other examples? Prahlad Maharaj. How did he hear? He wasn't even born, Prahlad Maharaj. He was in the womb of his mother. Yet hearing had a powerful effect. That's something startling. That the hearing even affects one in the womb of a mother. How powerful. And he came out and became an acharya at age 5. He was teaching Gurukul. Right? Much to the dismay of his father. Prahlad Maharaj's hearing gave him great faith and courage and fearlessness in the midst of his very demoniac father. Wonderful example of hearing. Magrari the hunter. What was he doing?
Half killing animals.
He was half killing animals. What can be more sinful? Killing the animals themselves is extremely sinful. But then making them suffer in extreme pain on the way up to death is even that much more sinful. But Magari the hunter, why was he doing that? Why was he killing that way? Huh?
Wasn't he taught?
That's what his father taught him. That was the means he had heard and learned how to maintain his family. That's what he had heard. Now we see the power of bad hearing. It can lead one down a very sinful life. But how was he saved? And what actually saved him? He had one particular mood that's very notable when Narada Muni approached him.
He was humble person.
He was very submissively hearing. He was not debating, but this, but that. He very and so how quickly was the transformation? Virtually instantly. The message can be one, but the recipient must also be rightly situated. We need both the proper speaker and the proper listener. When both combine, results manifest. Prabhupada comments in Srimad Bhagavatam about Sutta Goswami speaking to the sages. Both the audience and the speaker were very potent, and thus something extraordinary happened. So, what must be our mood in hearing in order for it to be effective? So we've gone through all the effort to find the right source of hearing. And we've identified with great faith this is the sort. But now what must we do in our hearing?
Be submissive.
Does that mean be blind in our hearing?
No.
We're with great intention selecting where I'm going to hear from. And then with great humility. And that's why Krishna says, Pariprashnena sevaya, that one must inquire submissively from the Guru with the intent to hear. So that was Mugari Hunter's great gift that he had for himself that made the transformation of hearing so fast. So sometimes we hear over and over and over and over again. We must look internally. What's happening? Why is, if Magari the hunter can be transformed, I think, oh, I'm so fallen. I'm not just fallen as Magari the hunter. You think, oh no, but Narada Muni came and gave him. We have Srila Prabhupada. Don't underestimate the potency of hearing we have in front of us. So let us look introspectively and think, what is it that I need to adjust if the transformation is not occurring as quickly as we like? Any other examples? These are all very, very good. How about, who did Haridas Thakur speak to? And what did she hear? Heavy philosophy? Her Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hurrying from the mouth of the pure devotee. She became a great acharya herself. Pure devotee. Surrendered everything. By the power of hearing. Right? So we see over and over and over again, present day and past. Most fallen, most off track, coming on track. Power of hearing from a bona fide source and the power of being a good recipient to hear. We need both. We must do our part and we must hear from the bona fide source. And if we do, then the results are supreme. And so, what was Srila Prabhupada's qualification in the eyes of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur to receive initiation from him?
Good hearing.
Huh?
Good hearing.
Good hearing. What? One more word you can add to good. And what did he show? Attentive, I would equate with good. Very close. What did he do that really captivated the heart of Bhaktisiddhanta? In hearing, it was good.
Fixated.
What did he do?
Fixated.
Fixated. He was enthusiastic. It's very close to good. He was eager to hear. Very eager to hear. And Sri Rupa Goswami explains that our eagerness to hear is a measure of devotion. Not how many verses you have memorized or any. No. How eager are we to hear? Why? Because what happens the more we hear, if we hear it correctly, the quicker we purify. So our eagerness, so we should try to, last time we spoke about desire, right? How to stoke that desire. So this week we can think how to increase our eagerness for hearing and how to take on good hearing. Because just as we talk about good chanting, we should be thoughtful about our hearing. We have huge facilities to hear. and we can hear virtually anytime, any place. That is very good. But the one thing we should be cautious of used to be, back in the day, you wanted to hear, you have to go to a class, maybe like this, go to the temple and hear. And when you hear that way, you've got limited options to multitask, right? It's a little, you have some peer pressure, right? But through electronic medium of hearing, we have the opportunity to do a lot of multitasking. Right? So it's not that we should not hear throughout the day, because it's better than not hearing. But we can set aside some amount of time to do good, attentive hearing. Even just a few minutes. And what is the best practical hearing we can do every day, even for just 5 minutes? That's Shravana. That's Kirtana.
Hearing the Mahamantra.
Reading Srila Prabhupada's books. Reading Srila Prabhupada's books is directly hearing from Srila Prabhupada. That is considered within hearing. So every day we just read a little bit from Srila Prabhupada's books. That serves as a good foundation for our daily hearing. Then we can hear other things as much as possible. Even if we have to multitask, it's still better than nothing, no doubt. So don't take this the other way, which is we should not know. We should hear while we're driving to work, while we're cooking, whatever, great. But just set aside a few, and when you read, you can't multitask.
Okay.
And you are hearing directly from Srila Prabhupada. So, reading Srila Prabhupada's books is a very powerful means to hear. And we should take advantage of it. Because he labored intensely to give us this gift. And we don't need any batteries, even the power is gone, the reception is not there, no Wi-Fi, we can still hear. By opening the book. And as much as possible, read from Srila Prabhupada's books. Read from the books. Yes, electronic reading is also good, but that is good out of convenience. If we are traveling, not in the midst of our books, and when to the extent possible, read from the books. There is a great potency in our absorption, in our intake, by reading from the books. So that's why we promote, reading from the Bhagavad Gita in these sessions. It's very, very powerful. And so, just in conclusion, Prabhupada says, if one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, the spiritual master, the bona fide guru, and hear from him about self-realization and follow in footsteps, one will be gradually elevated to the position of pure devotee. Is it so complicated? Find the right source, hear from them, and what's the next step? Follow. Follow in the footsteps. That's it. That's it. Prabhupada writes in one of his purports, pure devotion is infectious in a good way, just as much as disease is infectious. I said, wow, how appropriate for today's age. We're so worried about contagiousness of COVID for good reason. But no, pure devotion is just as contagious. Just as contagious. Stay in association. Hear from Srila Prabhupada, from Guru Parampara. And one is assured pure devotion. Remember, do we need any qualification? No. Right? Regardless of where we are. And even if we are not a good soul, Srila Prabhupada will give us the piety. That's his magnanimity. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to the most fallen, not to the most qualified. He looked for the most fallen and delivered them. So, we have no excuse. Just take shelter. Thank you. Shri Prabhupada ki
Jai.
jai. Narpati Vaishnavi. Any questions, discussion today? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, a few questions here. One, in that last stanza that you were reading just now, from here, as I understood, it said that our goal is to be the servant of those who are in knowledge of the Supreme Lord. That's the fifth line on that page.
Mhm.
One should learn to become the servant of the
Yeah.
But the next line basically tells me that my goal is to get elevated to be a pure devotee.
Mhm.
So isn't that, I would say, a contradiction? Because being a servant is dasana dasana dasa.
Mhm.
I'm trying to be here. Whereas becoming a pure devotee, meaning I'm trying to, my goal is to become so elevated.
What is the activity of a pure devotee? Dasana, 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 das.
Okay.
Pure devotee doesn't think, oh, I'm the high one, I'm all set. No, the pure devotee is the servant of the servant of the servant. That is the position of the pure devotee. Look no further, Narottam Das Thakur. Look no further, Srila Prabhupada. Look no further, Lord Nityananda. Door to door, begging. So the pure devotee doesn't sit on the throne and receive service from everybody. The pure devotee is the servant of the servant. Because they know, when we say pure devotee, let's define that real quick. What does pure devotee mean?
I realize that I'm a servitor of the Lord
Okay, keep going.
and I render service unto Him.
Alright, keep going. Yeah, let's build on that. What is pure devotion? I'm the servant of the Lord.
I mean, that is my only goal.
Surrender completely.
Surrender completely. You were gonna say, Prabhu?
No, I was just saying that is my only goal.
My only goal, which means I don't have goals of my own. No need for, I'm not for no material motives, even spiritual motives. And what is the intent of my service in pure devotion? To please Krishna. Singular. Anukulyena Krishna. A favorable intent to please Krishna. I have no desire for jnana, for karma, nothing. Amyabilashita shunya. Zero. Zilch. No desires. Not even liberation. Going back home to God. No desires. What is my only desire?
To serve Him.
To please Krishna. That's it. To please Krishna. Now, Anushilanam tells us that activity must be constant, it is active, and it follows in the footsteps of the Acharya. It's a three-part component of Anushilanam. Set that aside for a second. So, what is most pleasing to Krishna? Service to him or service to his devotees? He says it over and over again.
Yep.
So the wise pure devotee knows. Who does a pure devotee want to serve?
His devotees.
His devotee. Why? Why?
Indirectly, it pleases Krishna.
Because he wants to please Krishna. So he's not thinking, I want to massage Krishna's feet. He's thinking, I want to do what will please Krishna most. Krishna says, whoever serves my devotee pleases me more. Great, I'm going to go serve. Because anyabilashita shunyam. No desires. So the pure devotee is pure in the sense only focused on pleasing Krishna. No other self-motive. And so, by definition, the activity of the pure devotee is dasana, dasana, dasana. Because that is what's most pleasing to Krishna. Right? So then these are very nicely correlated.
Thank you.
And our service to one in knowledge, why we must serve those we are taking from, that is our tuition. Do we get any knowledge really for free? You go to school, you pay taxes. You go to college, you pay tuition. You take some professional development courses. Whatever. What is the payment to Guru? Service. Helping to propagate the mission that the Guru is on. Okay? So our service to Guru, our service to those involved is our dakshina, our reciprocation. Okay?
Thank you, Guru.
Yeah.
It answered my next question also.
Yeah, yeah.
No, it answered my
Oh,
next
okay,
question,
okay.
the
Oh.
other one also. So,
Perfect.
thank you, Guru.
Any other questions, comments?